The story I'm going to tell you takes place in India, Delhi, around 1900. The British ruled there at the time. But there was one thing they didn't like very much. There were snakes everywhere, venomous snakes. And so they came up with a plan. They put up a bounty for dead snakes, hoping the locals would start killing the snakes, bring them in, and that way the population of snakes on the street would decrease. And the plan seemed to work. Indeed, people started bringing in snakes, and the population on the streets started to decrease. And things were going well. And at some point, there were almost no snakes anymore on the streets. But there was something that was a bit odd, because the number of snakes that were handed in kept increasing and increasing. And that went on for a while until someone realized that they probably need to spend some time to understand what's happening. And so what they found out is that the locals had an entrepreneurial mindset, let's say. They started cobra farms, breeding cobras, killing them in exchange for some money, and that way they could provide for a steady income for their families. And they weren't pleased to find it out, so they made another quick decision, not learning from their previous mistake, right? No more bounties. What could go wrong? Well, it's important to realize there were thousands of cobras across all the farms at that point, waiting to get killed so they could be exchanged for money. And those all became wordless overnight. And so what happened? Many of those were released on the streets, and the population was higher than it ever was before. Oops. Hi, I'm Wesley. I'm an engineering manager in developer experience, and I'm excited to talk here today about Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. And the story I just shared is known as the cobra effect, and it's a famous example of Goodhart's law. In this talk, we'll analyze the law together, then we'll refine it, and eventually, together, we'll defeat it. In fact, let's make a small refinement right now by replacing the word measure with metric. Because I'll let you in on a secret, I'm not qualified to use the word measure, because you have to either be graduated from Harvard or Stanford, like Goodhart, you have to be a musician, or you have to be an actual engineer, the ones carrying tape measures. I'm none of those. So why does this apply to us in software engineering, you might ask? Well, is any of you working with snakes on a daily basis? Can I see hands? I see one hand there. Python, right? Well, not venomous, doesn't count. All right, but let me show you some metrics that I think you are familiar with. In fact, let's do an exercise together, and let's see why Goodhart's law is very relevant also for us in software engineering. Okay, let's imagine I'm your manager. You're all reporting to me, you're all ICs, individual contributors, and I have pulled some strings. The way your bonus is calculated at the end of the year, I just changed it, and it's going to depend on just 4 things. And the reason I do this, I want you to make you all more productive, and I want to increase the quality of the software you're all building. So the 4 things that your bonus will depend on are, first of all, lines of code. The more, the better. Secondly, the number of story points you delivered on, right? So this will get you up to speed. Now, quality-wise, get your coverage to 100%, obviously, if it's not there yet. And last but not least, we don't like defects, so the lower your defect age, the better. Now, I'd like to see some hands if you have an idea how you can make yourself a good amount of money by the end of this year. Nice. All right. A lot of entrepreneurs. Thank you. Keep your hands up, please. Now, keep your hand up if you believe your ideas will, in fact, increase your productivity and the quality of the software you're making. I'll talk to you afterwards. Thank you. Thanks. All right. So this is why Goodhart's law is relevant for us. It's everywhere. And so now that we have a good understanding of what the law is, let's visualize it. And it's very simple. It's a simple graph with targetness on the horizontal axis, quality on the vertical axis. What Goodhart's law says that a good measure, when it becomes a target, will become bad. And so a naive way to defeat this might be not to target at all. But as Ron was preluding to, that might not be the best approach, because let's look at another graph now with impact on the vertical axis. And this is, I think, the struggle here. No matter whether we target or not, we're not achieving any impact. We've seen if we target a metric, it might even have a negative impact, like with the cobras. So there are two problems for us that we need to deal with. One is targetness being binary doesn't help us. It doesn't give us any room to play with. Secondly, metric quality. It's not true, I would say, that every metric is good to begin with. There's good and there's better and there's bad. So let's refine the law, putting all of that in. So instead of saying when a good metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good metric, let's instead say the more a metric becomes a target, the worse it gets. See what speaker training did to me? All right, thanks for that, by the way. So let's do the same exercise again. Let's visualize this. This time, the horizontal axis is a continuum from not at all to paycheck dependent. And we see the same line as we saw before. Well, now it's a line before it were points. But we can now add multiple lines to indicate metrics with different quality. And this is where it becomes a bit more interesting. We can see that every metric ends up being a bad one if pushed all the way to the right. But along the way, we see the better the quality of the metric, the more resilient it is to this effect. Let's look at impact again. And we still see that on both extremes, we don't have any impact. But in the middle, there's a sweet spot. Do you see it? So, with this refined law, I think we have everything we need to defeat it. And it's actually just two simple steps. First, we're going to look at balancing targetness. And then we're going to look at increasing the quality of your metric. Before we do, I'm going to spend a minute to introduce a metric owned by one of my teams, because we'll then use that throughout the rest of this talk as an illustration, as a use case. All right. So, lead time for change. I'll quickly touch on the what, the why, and the how of this metric. Lead time for change measures how long it takes to deploy code from commit to production. It's a metric used across the industry and part of a framework called DORA. Why? A lower lead time for change enables faster value delivery and more agility. How? This metric for a year has been reported on already as part of the operational MBR, and you see behind me what that looks like. All right, now let's start defeating Goodhart's law. So first, let's look at balancing your targets, your metrics targetness. There's two things I'm going to talk about. First, changing the target, making it more or less, is an obvious way to balance targetness, but this is not something we always control, or maybe not even something we want to change directly. As is the case with lead time for change. It's reported on MBR, and this is not something in my control to change, and it might be a good thing that it's reported there. Instead, I'm going to talk mostly about whether a metric is actionable. And this is less obvious, but a metric feels less of a target when it's more actionable, because it gives more control. It creates a feedback circle, a feedback loop. And the focus starts to shift from beating the number to taking meaningful improvements. And let me illustrate 4 things that you can do to make a metric more actionable, and I'll talk about how it relates to lead time for change. The first one is called, I call it org drill down. And with lead time for change, it means you can see how much each of your teams contribute to your lead time for change on track level. And the same principle can be applied at any level of the organization. And this makes it more actionable. A related principle is called decomposition, meaning what is my lead time for change made up of? It's time coding, reviewing, testing, building, deployment, all those activities can be measured individually, and being able to zoom in and see those details will allow you to make meaningful improvements. And this is a feature we're about to release for lead time for change, and we hope will help to make it more actionable. A third concept, supporting metrics. Lead time for change, like many good metrics, is an outcome-based metric. And that's great because it directly ties into the impact you're trying to achieve. But it also makes it quite lagging, a slow metric with a long feedback loop. And so this is where supporting metrics can help. Supporting metrics are metrics that are typically output-based, that have a very small feedback cycle, and that can help you to measure, to set targets, and then measure and see how you progress against those targets. Knowing that eventually, lead time for change will be positively impacted by those. And one example, for instance, is ease of release. This is a metric we're already measuring in a different way, and we're now trying to connect the dots and make it part of the framework that we provide. Lastly, time. It seems simple, but we're struggling with this one the most. So typically, how it works today, if for you to find out that your lead time for change is higher than where it should be, is after it's being reported on an MBR, it's brought to your attention that you should probably lower it. By then, time's already ticking towards the next MBR, and this is a problem. To take a meaningful action, you need some time. And we need to find, as an owner, we need to find ways to give people the time they need to define meaningful actions. That probably means changing the culture, but it also means providing the dashboards for owners to have more insights earlier on. So, work in progress. Now, the second aspect, step 2. How can we increase the quality of the metric itself so it becomes more resilient to Goodhart's law? Again, I'm going to talk about 2 principles. The first one, keep it simple. We've heard it before, and it's super relevant here as well. And the reason is, for a metric to have an impact, it needs to be understood by different levels of the organization. They speak different vocabulary often, and so the only way for your metric to keep up and to have an impact is for it to be as simple as possible, so everyone can understand what you're trying to achieve. The second one is a lot less obvious. Weighted aggregation for impact. The moment you combine metrics of services or teams and roll them up into one number, you're aggregating. And the way you do that has a big impact. It determines where people put their focus and where you want people to focus in the area that can have the biggest impact. Let me show lead time for change as an example, what this means, and hopefully you'll understand how you could apply the same in your area. Imagine you are the proud owner of 2 services, Service Blue and Service Green. And their lead time for change are 2 days and 20 days respectively. And initially, we would report your lead time for change as 11 days, which is the average of 2 and 20. I can do the math, but I don't have time for that. And this is not something we put a lot of thought in, but what it does effectively is treat each service with the same weight. And what this leads to is if you're asked to make an improvement, you're going to spend your time improving lead time for change for the green service to bring it down. So this is where the focus is. Now, does this make sense? It could, but in this case it doesn't. Now, why not? Let me add an extra dimension. Here we're looking at the number of changes that were made on each of the services in the given month. we see that 100 times a change was made on the blue surface and deployed into production, whereas in the green one, even though it took 20 days, there was only a single change. Now, what we do, since we're weighing lead time for change by the number of changes that were made on the surface. And what that does is, instead of reporting 11 days, we would report your lead time for change as just over 2 days, which is much closer to what the actual experience is working on this surface. But it does another very important thing. If you're now asked to make an improvement, the focus will be on the blue surface, not the green one. Because bringing down lead time for change on the blue surface will have the biggest effect on the number. And this is what I mean with focusing where the biggest impact can be made. All right, let's wrap it up. We now know how we can improve the impact of your metric by maximizing and defeating Goodhart's law in 2 simple steps. So back to you. Are your metrics having the impact that you're aiming for? Or are people breeding cobras behind your back? I want you all to pick one metric that you own or one of your teams own and think about how you can make it more balanced and how you can increase the quality. Let's start defeating Goodhart's law together today. Thank you.